All right. In this segment, I want to start my discussions on bone functions of bone, properties of bone, physiology of bone. But before we talk about all the properties of bones, let's talk about what bones actually do for us. Now, bones are actually a very dynamic organ that have more functions than I think the average person realizes and appreciates. Um, and because I mean, a lot of this stuff. I mean, before I went to school and learned about this stuff, I only thought of bones as structure and protection. So bones give us structure, bones give us shape. Okay, the shape of bones, makes us look like who we are. I mean, that's one of the, there are different ways, for example, that we recognize different individuals. Through skin color, eye color, hair color, gender. And another way to physically recognize people, like facial recognition, for example. When you're using facial recognition, you're looking at the actual structure of that person's face, the bony structure. The Jay Leno. Sorry, Jay, but how does everyone remember Jay Leno? Big chin. Or how do you identify some people? Maybe someone has higher cheekbones, or different eye structure, or just all together, just that's that bones also, give us structure via, our thoracic cage, our arms. I mean, we physically are shaped the way we are because of how our bones are designed. And part of it that goes with the structural aspect of bone is protection. Bones, I mean, as pretty solid tissues. Remember bone, by classification, bone is a connective tissue. All right. And remember, connective tissues are basically gels and fibers, proteins and water. All right. So when you take certain kinds of proteins, all right, and you mix them with water, you form a gel. Okay, that's what connective tissue is. I mean, that's why blood is a connective tissue. That's why bone is a connective tissue. That's why cartilage is a connective tissue. Because basically you have cells that secrete certain proteins into the extracellular fluid in the matrix of the environment of that tissue, and then these proteins start to combine with the water in the environment, and then you start to form a certain kind of a gel. And some of those proteins may be more elastic, some proteins may be more tough and rigid, but the end result, when you mix the proteins in the water, is you form a gel. And these gels typically are quite sticky, because the name connective tissue kind of tells you a lot about what it does. I mean, it's the most abundant variable tissue in the body that's used to adhere and stick other tissues together. There's many other functions that go with it as well, but we don't need to talk about all the functions of connective tissue. Now, bone is a little bit of a unique connective tissue because, I mean, yes, it has the gel and fiber aspect of it, the proteins in the water, but you also have to add the minerals to it. Okay, you have to add the minerals, okay, because the main mineral you guys think about is calcium. Okay, but most of the minerals in the human body are are stored within bone tissue. I mean, other tissues of the body do have minerals in their environments, but for the most, like the heart utilizes calcium, muscle tissue utilizes calcium. Smooth muscle uses calcium for contractions, things like that. But most of the calcium in the human body is found within bone. Okay, and when you combine, calcium, okay, with these gels, all right, you form a more hardened, compact tissue. All right, and that's what bone is. Okay, that's the connective tissue aspect of bone. It just has minerals added to it, which makes it more tough. So basically, you take these minerals, stick them to the gels, and the gels become really hard. Okay, but still quite soft. You have to remember, this is still, I don't want to say quite soft, but softer than you think. I mean, it's not as hard, it's not rock solid like these tabletop. Bones are more flexible than you think, okay, because they are made of gels and water, and they do have minerals stuck to them to give them, stronger characteristics, but bones do actually have a good amount of give to them as well. Bones do flex and bend a little bit as you put weight on them, okay, which is helpful because that makes it a lot harder for us to break bones if there's a little extra flexibility to them. All right, but the strong structural nature of this connective tissue gives us protection as well, because a lot of our there's a good handful of our bones that cover vital organs of the body. For example, you've got your cranium protecting the brain. You've got your vertebrae protecting your spinal cord. You've got your thoracic cage, your ribs, and your vertebrae protecting, your heart, your lungs, your thymus, the beginning of your aorta, the ends of the vena cava, chunk of the esophagus and the trachea, all the organs contained within your thorax. And a little bit of the upper abdominal organs as well. Most of your liver is up underneath the thoracic cage. Your spleen is way up there. The upper third of your kidneys is underneath your rib cage. Okay, some of your stomach is protected by that. So these bones can physically protect soft organs from trauma, from damage. All right. And another very important function of bone is blood cell formation. Okay, blood cell formation. Now a lot of people say blood formation. You have to remember there's two components to blood. There is water, which is what we call plasma, and then there are cells, which are what we call formed elements. Okay, the plasma is just water with a bunch of solutes dissolved in it, amino acids, electrolytes, metabolic waste products, and proteins. Okay, and sugars. There's lots of other stuff. Those are just a few examples. Okay, but that's the watery aspect of blood. All right, the formed element aspect of blood are all the cells that are contained within blood. Okay, and the process of making blood, and there's a specific term for this, is called hematopoiesis. Let me double check, make sure I spelled it. Okay, hematopoiesis. All right, hemat, meaning hemato, meaning blood, and then poiesis, to make. Okay. And specifically, the part of bone that this takes place in is what's called red bone marrow. Okay, red bone marrow. Red bone marrow is just essentially really thick blood. Okay, your blood, the circulating blood you think about is about 55% plasma, 55% water, and about 45% cells. Okay, so water with a lot of cells mixed into it. Red bone marrow, give or take, is about 90% cells and about 10% water. Okay, so it's just overly thick blood. Okay, but one of the there's a very common type of cell you find in there. There are stem cells in there. Okay, and stem cells within the bone marrow are constantly dividing and turning over all the time to produce new blood cells on a regular basis. Because there are some blood cells we lose almost as quickly as we make them. And there are some red blood cells, like red blood cells, for example, do die every, on average, 120 days. Okay, some white blood cells may only live for a few hours. Okay, so we have to constantly replenish our blood cell count all the time. All right, and that's very tightly regulated as well, but that's more of an AAP2 topic that we'll talk about later on. Okay, so hematopoiesis within the red bone marrow. There's another kind of bone marrow you find as well. It's called yellow bone marrow. And you find that kind of within the hollow shafts of long bones. The bone marrow really doesn't do anything. It's like one of the functions you remember about connective tissue is it's not only designed to stick other cells and tissues together, it's just there to take up space. Okay, connective tissue takes up space, and that's realistically what the yellow bone marrow is doing within the hollow part of these long bones. It's just there. It's filling space. We don't really use it for much. Just kind of think of it as like maybe a little bit of fat storage. I think in very severe cases of anemia, you might convert that to red bone marrow, but that's a rarity. So realistically, yellow bone marrow is good for making homemade soup taste good, because when you make homemade split pea soup and you put the pork bone in there and you let the marrow leak out, or I like to make curry. I take chicken thighs and I cut the meat up and I hack the bone in half, the femur in half, and I put that in the curry and let it sit, let the fat leak out. It makes things taste really good. So we've covered structure, protection, mineral storage, blood cell formation, and bones are also very vital to movement. Okay, now bones themselves don't move all on their own. Okay, bones move because of muscles. Okay, muscles are attached to bones, and as a result, muscles use bones to create movement. They have a very, very symbiotic relationship with one another. All right, so like I said, so basically, let's do this out. second. There's a reason why I study biology, not art, folks. So they have to bear with me here. Okay, so let's say this is a femur and that's a tibia. Okay, your spine, your shin bone. Now, basically, these, where two bones come together, that's obviously what we call a joint. Okay, a joint or an articulation. These two bones articulate with one another. Now, these bones are, these articulations are supported by, cartilage, the rubbery connective tissue to reduce friction, wear, and tear. There are different ligaments, okay, that you find, to help just secure the joint a little more, to help keep the bones held together in one piece. And there are also tendons. There's muscles here, right? And okay, so for example, let's say we've got let's just say we've got a muscle here. All right, so you got muscle. So you got a belly, which is like the meat, the movable part of the muscle. You got an origin, and then you've got an insertion. Okay, basically these are just points of attachment. We'll talk more about that later on. Okay, but remember that muscles use tendons. Okay, muscles are attached to bones via tendons. Okay. And muscles behave very simply. Muscles, when a muscle contracts, how they behave is they shorten. Okay, so when a muscle contracts, the protein fibers of the muscle are going to start sliding past each other, and that's going to make the length of the muscle get shorter. Okay, and it's going to kind of fall up. All right, not fall up like form a ball, but it's just going to get shorter and more bulky. All right, and then when that muscle shortens, it's going to pull on the tendon. Okay, it's going to pull on the tendons. All right. And then in turn, so that tendon is going to pull on the bones. And however the tendon attaches to that bone and however the joint is designed, you'll have specific movements taking place. Okay, so without bones and muscles wouldn't have anything to attach to, or something else would be different. And so muscles need bones to create movement. Okay. And this is helpful as well because we're going to talk about this in another video, is that, muscle contractions help make bones more dense, okay? Because, bones, are constantly undergoing a process called remodeling all the time. They're constantly stripping away layers of tissue. They're constantly adding tissue to themselves. And, the more physical force you put on a bone, it's going to remodel itself to become more thick and dense. All right, and that's very important because that makes your bones nice and strong. And for women, that's especially an important concept to understand because that's a good way to help lessen the effects of osteoporosis. All right, so those are the major functions of bones: structure, physical protection, hematopoiesis, which is blood cell production, movement, and mineral storage. And we'll talk more about the mineral storage, the calcium aspect, and calcium homeostasis in another video as well. But these are the overall, the general functions